Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us online at thewww.wine. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. How are you, Kim?
I'm doing pretty well, Mark. Good to be back with you talking about wine and the wine world.
Always fun to talk wine with our listeners. And today we have a very special guest joining us, Victor Owen Schwartz. How are you today, Victor?
I'm pretty good.
We are so excited to have you. For our listeners, Victor is the founder and president of VOS Selections, based out of New York. He's an importer of wine and spirits. And we're excited to have Victor because many of you probably know him from being an importer in the United States, but he's gained a lot of popularity with recent wine articles in 2025, starting with his role as the lead plaintiff in a landmark lawsuit, VOS Selections versus the U.S., which we're going to talk about. We're really excited to first, Victor, hear your story of your background in the wine world and how you got to this wine importing business.
Well, that's a long story. So
We
I don't know
want to
how we're
hear
going to
it.
dig into it. I mean, after college, I thought that the best place to go to get a kind of a general background was in banking. I thought I would be looking at the most different kinds of businesses. And I'm from New Jersey originally. I went to school in upstate New York, and I moved out to San Francisco. I wanted to do something a little different. Anyway, I spent about 5 years in banking, which gave me a great background in business, but I realized pretty quickly that that was not my life's dream. It took me a while to get from there to here. Lots of steps involved, but when you have a banking mentality, you tend to do things in a very, what should I say, structured way. It's not the mind of an entrepreneur. One of the things I wanted to do in the early 80s was have a boutique mail order wine catalog of California wines, which would have been brilliant. But basically my banking background kind of talked me out of it. So it's not always good to be ahead of your time. But I grew up around incredible food and wine. My father was in Germany after the war with my mom, and they were a couple of kids from Brooklyn whose eyes were alighted to like European cuisine. It was not something they grew up with in New York in the Depression. And my mom really got into it. She's an early acolyte of Julia Child. And along with food, she really got into wine. And in those days, this is in the early 60s, you could afford to buy first growths of Bordeaux. And you could afford to buy the best Burgundies. I've looked back on this and looking at some numbers. So like Lafite Rothschild 62 was like $8 a bottle. Petrus was like 20. So our cellar was filled with this kind of stuff. Not that I became a connoisseur at 10 years old. I wasn't that precocious. But it was just a regular thing in our house. I think that's what really set into my mind, that wine was just part of the table. Mm-hmm. And I've always looked at wine that way, that it's just part of a culture and a cuisine. And that's, to me, that's a really important formative aspect. But back to the banking thing. So, I got out of there. I was taking cooking lessons at night. I went to Tante Marie's cooking school in North Beach in San Francisco and trying to figure out what to do with my life. I did some catering. I moved back east. I worked in a couple of wine shops back here. The critical turning point for me was when I wrote to Steven Spurrier, which I'm sure you guys know. I hope your listeners know who Steven Spurrier was. Well, this was, in the mid 80s. This was only a few years after the judgment of Paris. And if you remember, he was the bad boy of the wine business. He
really was.
He really was. I mean, and again, and you also think about the wine business was a much more buttoned up kind of place than it is now. Really buttoned up. The big reviewers were British, and they had an accent and they were reviewing all these, very fancy kinds of wines and all that. But I wrote to Steven Spurrier and said, hey, I really want to get into this business. This is what I want to do. This is my dream. And he said, look, you come to Paris, I'll give you a job in my wine bar. And at the time he had a wine bar, he had a store, he had a bookstore, a really beautiful spot there on Cave Madeleine, I remember was the name. And it was near the Madeleine in Paris. And he said, but if you're serious, you're not going to be in a city, you're going to be in the vineyard. And who was I to argue with Steven Spurrier?
Wow.
So the story gets long. I don't know how long you want to go.
It's amazing.
But if you're interested. So how do I get myself from here to there is really the question. Quite interestingly enough, I managed to rent my apartment out to one of the sound engineers for the Cars. the musical group, the Cars, Boston oriented.
From
Right?
Boston. Uh-huh.
Boston, right? So I owe the beginning of VOS Selections to the Cars because they were making an album on 8th Street and my apartment in the Village was maybe 4 blocks away. And like out of the blue, so much that happened to me was total kismet, total fate. Out of the blue, there was a kind of this real estate woman who was all business, all serious, and she was putting together apartments all over the area for, well, obviously for, for Rick Okasek and his, and the band, but also for like the sound engineers and all this. And they needed to find these apartments. I had a rent controlled apartment. I rented it out, paid for my way over there. I had points on my flying back and forth from California to New Jersey to see my family. And it just kind of all came together. And I went to Paris and I was still trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to listen to Mr. Spurrier. He's God, he is God. And I had done some work in wine shops. And at the time, an area of France, which so impressed me with so much potential, was the Southern Rhone Valley. And there was a great book from Livingston and Learnmouth, two British guys from a book publisher, Faber and Faber. I think they're still around. It's a British
I think
publishing house, but they make really serious books. And I got this great book on the Rhone, and it was just filled with great stories and about great small producers in all the little regions around the Rhone. At that time, you had maybe Guigal and Chave and Jaboulet. It wasn't a lot of Rhone. None of the village wines. It was just no breadth. And it just struck me how much potential there was. And I have to say I was right. And I lived outside of Avignon in Villeneuve-les-Avignon. It's just across the river. And I just visited wineries every day. And that's what I did for 6 months. I visited wineries. The people were amazing and my French sucked, but they helped me. It's a different world now in the wine world. You go to France now and they all only want to speak English to you. But it was just a beautiful, beautiful, challenging experience for me. And everyone wanted to give me wine to take back. And I was this young 28-year-old punk, ponytail, and it was like, why are you giving me wine here? I'm trying to do something. I was going to be broker the wines. I had some contacts in New York from working in retail shop, and I was trying to just figure out how do I put this business together. So I eventually came back to New York, actually, and had a bunch of samples. Everyone was giving me échantillon, one of the first words in French that I learned. That and crachoir, where a spittoon. Those are the two things you need to learn, échantillon and crachoir. And at the time, the International Wine Center was right across from City Center in Midtown in the 50s. And they used to do all these kinds of professional tastings with journalists. And as luck would have it, they were doing a Rhone tasting. And I had to cheat a little bit. They said, are these wines available? And I said, they're going to be available soon. When you start a business, there's a lot of bootstrap operation going on. You have to kind of make things up as you go along. I wouldn't say as much as fake it till you make it, I guess is what people say now. But you do have to kind of, be flexible. Anyway, I entered my wines that I had tasted, the best ones that I thought I had found there, and they got great reviews. It was crazy. From important people like Terry Robards. I mean, I was in New York Newsday. I was in the Wine Spectators. All these places were like, they just had this Rhone tasting and all these wines that I brought in, like they were getting these great scores. I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something here. So how am I going to get this done? And I tried to be a broker. I didn't really know how that worked so well. Long story short, I ended up bringing a container of wines in because I had customers, I had stores like Astor Wines that wanted to buy good quantities of these wines that I show them. I was a little bit naive about pricing and my pricing was really low. But I figured I had to be low because I didn't have an imprimatur. I wasn't Robert Chatterton or Kermit Lynch. And I thought, okay, I'm going to wow people with value. That was really my, what should I say, the coin of the realm for me. That was my value proposition, things that just punch so far above their weight, above their price level. And looking for things that you just didn't find everywhere. That was also really important to me. And there's a lot of these small regions in the Rhone that I guess nowadays we're much more fluent in the Rhone Valley. But then you didn't really see Vaqueras. You maybe saw one Gigondas, Valréas, all the wonderful villages, Queyran, et cetera, and even some Provence wines. I did a lot of business with the Coteaux de Tricastin. This was really unlooked at territory, and it gave me an edge. It gave me an edge into the business. So from there, I realized I'm going to find things that are just kind of off the beaten path. I'm going to work with small family farms. I'm going to work directly. There's not going to be any importer between me and my customers who are stores and restaurants. And I'm going to bring in incredible value, and I'm going to bring incredible wines in. So it was making that connection between these small family farms and the customers customers over here in New York. And I think we've really tried to stay to that philosophy over 40 years.
Wow. Amazing story.
And is that still the structure of the company today? You go over there, you do the choices, and you have
Well, yeah,
relationships here.
you
I mean,
can't.
I'm assuming it has changed over the last
Well,
40 years.
I have to say I had a little bit more time on my hands when I started than I have now.
Mm.
So I would go to a region, I'd spend weeks there. And I really wanted to learn the wines. I wanted to learn the terroir. I wanted to understand what made Cahors good and what made it not good, and that was just about spending time and tasting a lot. There was so much less access you had then as you do now. I mean, so much less choice. So you needed to really spend time in places. So I'd go to France. I'd spend 4 to 6 weeks over there, driving around, sometimes with a friend and sometimes by myself. It's always been a great adventure. The adventure is still there. Some of it might be from my office, being in New York and being around in business for a number of years. We're fortunate. We have a good reputation and we do get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails. People want to work with us. And it's really kind of hard. Sometimes I say we're kind of like an oyster, you just open your shell and everything comes through and you're going to pick out the nutrients, the interesting things that you want to work with. But of course I do travel a lot over there, but it's usually it's less discovery. The discovery really happens more here than over there, but there's still discovery that happens there. You talk to sommeliers, you go into small shops, you poke around, you find stuff.
That's one of the things Kim and I wanted to kind of go over with you and our listeners to hear is you had mentioned you're in New York, you're importing the wine, and you're directly selling to restaurants and stores yourself. Do you have a distributor in New York?
We are a distributor. We are an importer and distributor.
Importer and distributor.
That's correct. We sell to
great.
stores, restaurants, clubs. We're in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania directly. And then we do sell through other distributors in other states.
When
like
you
Florida,
first started, were you also that function, importer and distributor?
No, my feeling was just focus. New York is such a big market between New York and New Jersey. I just felt like I didn't know to go. I didn't have to go wider. There was just so much going on right in my home territory, and I could work directly with these people. It was a two-man show, me and my mom, and I was doing all the selling. So I like talking to the customers. It's exciting to bring somebody something that they haven't had before and to see their reaction when it's positive, of course.
Yeah. Usually I hear stories of big distributors who then go to someone and say, we want to import that ourselves. It seems like the way you did it is really unique in that you're doing both sides right away.
Well, at the time it was more unique than it is now, I would say. You have a lot of small guys out there today who are doing importing, distributing, certainly in New York. You have to realize something, Mark. This is where I try to avoid sounding like an old man, but I have to. There's certain aspects I got to bring up. Like in my day, look, first of all, there were so many barriers to entry in the mid 80s. You had to speak French. You had to speak a foreign language. Now you don't have to speak a foreign language.
Right.
You had to know how to navigate. Traveling around France with a Michelin map was tough, and it took a lot of talent, a lot of navigational skills, both from the map, talking to people, getting around, maybe going to the post office. I had a lot of funny adventures in that regard. Now you have GPS.
Yeah.
You don't even know where you are. You're going around in one of those traffic circles and it just says, pick third right. And that's all you know. And you do that. You don't know where you are.
Yeah. And I'm sure you wrote a lot of letters too back then, right?
Oh my God. I started before there was even a fax machine. I was trying to encourage I was sending FedExes to place orders. I mean, that's not very efficient money-wise. I call them on the phone. So the barriers to entry with technology have really reduced. So there's been a flood of importers. It's really quite easy to import nowadays. And you have companies that all they do is clear wines for you.
All right.
It's a much more, dare I say, fluid business than it was when I started.
The laws and everything you had to learn to import and distribute back then, were they a lot less strict than they are now, or a lot more paperwork?
No, I mean, well, look, you hire a good lawyer. I had a wonderful lawyer, Leonard Fogelman, still around. He's been helping us actually with the United States Wine Trade Alliance. He gave me a lot of direction. A good freight forwarder will give you direction. But a lot of it you are on your own. I learned very early about the necessity of temperature controlled shipping. Freight forwarders did not want to do it. And they said, oh, no one's doing it. Don't worry. Chateau and Estates, they bring in all those, first growth Bordeaux. They don't care. They bring in a whole container. They just don't worry about it. But I realized early on on that it was really a very important thing, temperature control. So we were very early on using that. I know Kermit Lynch was as well. He had me beat by, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 years. And there's some quality guys out there doing it, but there were not many of us. There were not many of us. And then you go to I can go into all kinds of things, but no, there were not many of us doing what we were doing. And one of the funny things was like, going into a French restaurant. That was one of the bigger barriers. A stuffier place. Again, not so many of those kinds of places around. And I remember telling them, trying to sell to one of these places, I think it was La Côte Basque, and them saying, well, all the good wines they keep in France. They don't allow them to be exported. Which is really just the opposite, right? Anyway, there's so many funny stories about how the business and the market has changed. But the laws, they haven't changed. They haven't changed enough, actually, Mark.
Yeah.
They're a little set in amber. All these laws come out of Prohibition. And the problem is when you have something that's been around for so long, a law that's been around for so long, it's kind of like it's kind of like a callus that everyone's self-interest starts developing around the laws. So once that happens, you can't change it because you change one thing, it's going to affect somebody else. Or when you try to affect and help that person, you're going to affect somebody else in a negative way. So the easiest thing is to do nothing. Shame. Have not kept up at all with the change in the world. Started working in retail. They just talk about how things, the laws have changed. I mean, we were not allowed to take credit cards in New York. Not to mention, we couldn't sell corkscrews or a wine map or a book.
Because you were just wine. So you weren't allowed to do any of those
we could sell wine and spirits.
Right. But
not beer.
But not stuff. And
it's still limited in New York.
Yeah.
I'm hoping they're going to change that. It's really limited. Yeah.
I went to college in New York, and I remember that we had to go to multiple places to get all of our, college booze.
Sure, exactly. It's kind of silly, right? But again, there's a lot of self-interest involved. You've got small package stores. You've got these giant distributors, like Southern Wine and Spirits, and everyone's got their own interests, and nothing can move. It gets kind of frozen, and it's a shame. It makes it a less dynamic market than it could be.
That's so interesting. I mean, there's just this.
People don't know
there's
the
so
laws.
many to it. Yeah.
There's a lot to it.
You're right,
not just the layers currently, but what you said about how much things have changed in the last, say, 40 years. And this is one of the things that I bring up in my history of wine class is that I think most consumers don't understand just how different the culture around wine was 60, 70, 50 years ago. And it is so vastly different here than I think anybody really realizes, unless you're, like us and we've been, doing this forever. But
so
it's
like
pretty
my
wild.
mom, so I grew up in, I was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and grew up outside of there. And my mom would go to the local liquor store because that's where they were. They were a liquor store. They were like wine shoppy like we have now, right? Go to the liquor store and, and my mom was like a reader, she'd see something and say, that 62 vintage of Bordeaux, I read that it's supposed to be really good. I'm going to buy some cases of it. You could do that, right?
Oh, Mom.
So
I like your mom.
Wait. Oh, yeah. Shirley was great. She was a character. So she'd go to the liquor store and she'd say, well, I want to buy, I want to buy the Latour, the Lafite, Aubryon. I want to get some Aubryon Blanc. And the owner of the store was like, well, I can get those. I can order those up for you, Mrs. Schwartz, but you're really sure you want to spend that kind of money for wine? I've got some nice jugged wine over here. Like I said, it was, as much as $8 a bottle for Lafite in those days. And that was the mentality, do you really want to spend that kind of money? That sounds crazy. I mean, a bottle of wine in a store, perfectly reasonable something or other from California was probably $1.50.
Thank you for listening to us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark and Kim, with our special guest, Victor Owen Schwartz. You can find more information about us on our website, thewww.wine, and on our social media, The Wonderful World of Wine. You can find out more information about Victor and his portfolio at VOSSelections.com. That's VOSSELECTIONS.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Wonderful World of Wine. Mark and I are chatting today with Victor Owen Schwartz, and we're talking about importing and wine regulations and all sorts of things like that. I was hoping, Victor, that you could give our listeners just like a quick 20-second description of the three-tier system and how it is that wine selling and wine distribution is different depending on what state you might live in?
Well, we have 50 states and 50 separate laws. And each of those states has actually 51 because you got Washington, D.C. too, I guess. And they all have a liquor authority. I guess the main reason they have a liquor authority is so they can collect a lot of taxes. So yeah, we pay taxes on the federal level and we pay taxes on the state level. So everyone does very well from our business. The three-tier system is the traditional system where you have a large importer, often a national level importer will bring goods over to their warehouse. And then you have distributors in each state, and then you have retailers. So that's the classic three-tier system. And something that's so important for people to understand is because of our long puritanical history here in America, alcohol is a sin beverage, sin product, and it's very heavily regulated. Of course, as I was saying before, sin products also bring in a lot of revenue for government. So that's, I guess, as a positive thing to the sin aspect. So yeah, so that's the three-tier system.
Well, that's a good lead into the big news that you made, Victor, on the tariff fight. So what are tariffs on wine and other fees that you pay? I mean, you deal with so many different countries importing. How does all that work and what led to being upset with the tariff?
Well, let's roll it back pre-tariff. Anybody that imports anything to this country is going to pay something to customs. There's the Customs and Border Protection Bureau, part of the federal government. And there I was told, I didn't read them all, there are over 14,000 listings for different products. The specificity of things that we import to this country is very, very specific. Each item, even within the wine world, it's not as if, I'm bringing in wine. It's something like, well, I'm bringing in red wine from Europe over 14% alcohol. And that would be a different tariff for white wine from maybe, from Morocco would be a different tariff. So there's a big schedule of these, what you're paying at customs. And that's always been. And for a place like Europe, obviously we're dealing with the EU, it was somewhere, I don't know, between $3 and $4 a case. That's what you paid. With the tariffs, of course, when the tariffs were promised to us, when our current president was running for election, he said he loved tariffs and he's a man of his word and he kept his word and put tariffs in. Now, we were already preparing for that because if you remember, under the first Trump administration, we had tariffs in 2019. This time around, we did not know what to expect. Certainly, he had a lot fewer constraints. And as we can see from the tariff schedule he came out with, where he tariffed every single country on the planet, they were quite extensive, to say the least. Although each country seemed to get, or each region seemed to get a different tariff schedule, depending upon some kind of formula that they came up with, which every economist said was ridiculous. But it was onerous, and it was very, very tough what we were looking at. Under the first tariffs in 2019, there were a lot of kind of workarounds in terms of alcohol percentage. There was sparkling wines were not tariffed. There was just a little bit more breathing room, if you will. This time around, there was no breathing room. It was a blanket tariff. And if you remember, when the tariffs were announced, one day would be one number, next day would be another number, and the next day might be another number. So you had this incredible instability. It was chaotic. And it was a problem. It was a big problem. Just by a bit of fate, a cousin of mine was up visiting here from Washington and told me that his ex-law professor was bringing a lawsuit against the tariffs. And this was the beginning of April. So the Liberation Day tariffs had just been announced. And of course, tariffs were very foremost on my mind and everybody's mind in this country. If you were any kind of importer, certainly in our industry, we were all freaking out. It's not even the word. It was just, what do we do? Mm-hmm. It was, I don't know, there's a combination, there's some good word between freaking out and resignation, it's just like, how do we even begin to deal with this new landscape?
On average, how was it, you had mentioned the tariff was like $3 to $4 a case. What was the average going, the tariff?
They were talking about all kinds of numbers. I mean, the number that it settled on from Europe, right? That's just Europe, was 15%. We were paying a few percent. And those tariffs, I have to strongly point out two very important things that many people don't get right, even to this day. And there's so much misinformation out there. First of all, the tariffs are on top of all the customs and duty we are already paying. They were not in lieu of. And here's the really important thing. American businesses are the ones paying the tariffs. The administration liked to put out the untruth that it was going to be foreign entities paying the tariffs. But that is not what happened. I know in a few instances, Their foreign entities have been able to absorb that. But in our industry, and especially someone like me working with small farmers, they don't have that kind of leverage. And if anything, they've been under the same kind of inflationary pressures on inputs that we're all facing here. If it's boxes and glass, there was a glass shortage because of the war in Ukraine. So many problems. Now you were adding this on top of it. American importers have been paying the tax. That's the truth.
And how would that work, Victor?
I'll tell you how it worked. You had to pay the tax. Sorry?
When they ship the container, you have to prepay it, or you pay it when it lands? You'd have to pay it when it lands.
Well, you are prepaying it, Mark. I mean, when it lands, all right, the government is very powerful. The only other organization I know who can pull that off is probably the mafia. You don't get your container until the government gets paid. And it's all digital and it's all automatic. They go right into your bank account and they take their money.
Wow.
You don't get your container. It's not like if I bought something from you and I said, hey, Mark, I'm a little short. Can I pay in a few days? And you'd probably say, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. You're a good customer. The government doesn't work that way. You want your container, you pay us now. That's upfront. That's before I've even taken the container, unloaded in my warehouse, before I have sold a single bottle of wine. So in the case of Europe, that's 15%. So that money, if you think about it from a cash flow perspective, it is gone forever. I've just handed the government 15% of my cash flow.
Bad business.
It's kind of bad for business. So you can understand what an existential threat that we all feel. It's like, where am I going to come up with that 15%? And I'm not a giant corporation. I can't go to the capital markets and, sell some bonds or stock or whatever. Where am I going to get that money from? That is has been a real existential threat. Continues to be. We're still paying tariff. We'll get to that point. So yeah, you have to pay that money right up front. Gone. 15%. Done. This is an industry, despite what some people may think, it's not a high margin industry. It's not like some other industries like, clothing, for instance, I know is a very high margin industry. Talk to importers and distributors, you might make 5 to 10% at the end of the day. No one is making a killing. Retailers, these are some of the lowest margin products that are sold at retail. No one's making a killing. I'd say most of the people in this industry do it because they really love it. There's a real passion in our business. There really is.
Right.
Sure, if you're really big and you're selling some mass market product, I'm sure that you can make money at it. But even then, it's not a big margin business. That's the critical point to be made. So yeah, it was quite a hit on quote unquote Liberation Day, which I like to call Strangulation Day, because it really strangled a lot of businesses. No one has done well from it. So when you hear the administration boasting about all the money they've collected from tariffs, a lot of people say, like myself, say, well, big deal. You put your hand in my pocket and took money out of it. What are you boasting about? Think about it. That money just came right out of the economy, right?
Yeah.
Right out of the pockets of small businesses.
And at the time, all the push was, well, this will help American wineries because they won't have to pay this tariff. But then again, they were paying for their glass, their corks, their equipment, right? They were paying tariffs more.
And this is a very, very important part. There's so many things to get into here. But one of the important aspects of all that is that we work in a national distribution system. So we're all kind of, and a global one at that, right? So in America, we're very interdependent. We bring in products from all over the world here, wines and spirits and sakes, and then we sell them. We're dependent upon this wide range of products. As I've heard from a number of American wineries, what they have found is that because the tariffs, because that 15% cut, in the cash flow, their distributors around the country, they've got less money to spend on American wines. And there's something else that's happened. Because we've had to contract, that's the only place we could find the necessary liquidity to pay the tariffs, because you got to get that money from somewhere. What do? We cut back. Our appetite for risk went to zero, to negative, right? And there's always new wineries, always looking for new opportunities, always saying, hey, would you be interested in working, distributing my wines? And we're in a risky business. We bring in a pallet, 2 pallets, 3 pallets of product. We have to sell it. We have to convince the customers that, hey, this is really good. It's a good value. And I don't have to tell you, this is a very competitive business. Very competitive.
Wow. It's risky even before all the chaos.
You can't afford the risk. So a lot of American wineries are asking. Good stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, European wineries too. I mean, you're not going to be picking up things. So it's been very hard to manage your inventory, your portfolio. The tariffs were a complete game changer in a negative way. And if you want to grow an economy, you want to grow an industry, you want to grow your industries, this is the exact opposite. You don't want to constrict them. And that's what we've done.
This is not not a good business thing. You had to do something about it. How did we get from this day of tariffs happening to now you're in the Supreme Court? How does that happen?
Well, as I mentioned, a family member was visiting and told me about their ex-law professor, Professor Ilya Soman at George Mason University, very distinguished constitutional lawyer, was bringing a case against the tariffs. And this must have been a week or so after the tariffs were announced on April 2nd. So I got in touch with him immediately. It was a Sunday, I'll never forget. And I told him what I was doing and what was going on in my industry. And he got right back to me and he said, let's talk. And we spoke for about an hour. And then he said, you know what? You got to talk to my co-counsel. And we set up a Zoom call for a couple of days later because they were raring to go. They had other small businesses, not in the wine business, ready to go. And I told them my story. And frankly, being an importer and distributor of wines and spirits was just kind of a perfect company for them to be representing. So there were 5 of us, all in different fields, all importers, all being impacted by the tariffs. And we signed up, and I just thought I'd throw my hat in the ring. But a couple of days later, they asked me to be the lead plaintiff. Not sure exactly why, but I kind of think that really nobody else really wanted to do it. It was like to put your neck on the line in that situation was a very scary thing to do. But I spoke to a friend of mine who's in the Attorney General's office here in New York, and I said, well, is this a risky thing for me to do? And should I do it? And he said, yes and yes. It's very risky, but you should do it. And, at the time, we were all kind of going, what the hell? Where are the leaders of this country? Where are the billionaires? Where's Zuckerberg and Bezos? Like, why aren't they stepping up and whispering in the president's ear? Like, this is bad business. This is bad for business, right? Nobody was saying boo. And of course, Congress just folded because Congress is the one that has the rights to impose taxes and tariffs. Nobody was doing anything. So it was just kind of like, there it was. I can't say no. So went to the Court of International Trade in New York, a very geeky court that almost no one's heard of until our tariff case. And it kind of got on the map. A very interesting place, actually. 3-judge panel. We won 3-0. The administration appealed the case. It went to the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. That's the second highest court in the country. We won there 7-3. Solid win. There was not a question. We had such a strong case. We have such a strong case. We had 6 major points and we only had to win on one of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And each point was major, slam dunk. And if we have the time, we'll get into it. But they were really strong points. So of course it got appealed to the Supreme Court. And we kind of knew from the beginning it was going to end up at the Supreme Court. Because you got to realize this tariff case, it was about more than just tariffs. It was about separation of powers. It's about the rule of law in this country, right? There's a lot of very strong constitutional issues about this case. We went to the Supreme Court. I was down there. It was an incredible experience to go there. I recommend it to anybody to see any case at the Supreme Court. I cannot recommend it enough. It was really an incredible experience. And as you know, on February 20th, I think it was, we won 6-3. I'd be happy with 5-4, but 6-3, I think was an extremely strong win. And the majority opinion was written by a conservative justice, Neil Gorsuch, and it was just fantastic. And I also want to say that from the get-go, the amount of support that I've received from across the country, strangers, when they heard what we were doing, incredible support from all walks of life, all across party lines. It's a completely bipartisan, non-political issue. It's an economic issue. It's just bad business. And people were really, really angry. And the case really hit a raw nerve. I could see it. It's really been an amazing experience in that sense. People taking the time to write me letters, handwritten.
You couldn't.
I kept them. It's been amazing.
You couldn't read
really
an
touched
industry.
The raw nerve, this case.
You couldn't read an industry newsletter without seeing your name in this case in the wine industry. Everybody in the wine world was talking about it, was following it. It was just one of those things that it was just incredible.
But my point is, it spread beyond the wine. This is everybody. This case touched on everybody, every small business, and of course it affects consumers. But again, the problem is consumers haven't really seen it. They haven't really been impacted to the degree that they're still going to be, even more so than they have.
So now, are you applying to get refunds? You think has the tariff stopped? Are you?
Yeah. Well, the IEEPA tariffs stopped, right? The statute that was used, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that was blatantly illegal. It was used because it was the easiest and most expeditious way to do things, but it was not that statute was never written for tariffs. The other statutes, which he's now using, they put in right away. So we're still paying tariffs. We have not gotten away from tariffs. Those statutes are much more limited in scope and in time duration.
And I see where everybody's applying for refunds? You think that's going to happen?
Yeah. Do I think it's going to happen? Well, yes. If you follow, so after we went to the Supreme Court, and I don't know how the legal world works exactly. I've certainly learned a lot. It went back to the federal district court and then went back to the Court of International Trade, where it started, because that's the court that ruled in our favor. So I guess that's the controlling court. The court said to brought in the administration and somebody that had filed for a refund. And they said to the judge, single judge, Judge Eaton, said to the administration, okay, look, you guys, you lost at the Supreme Court. Stop pussyfooting around. I need to hear a plan. And I think that was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. You're going to come back to my court on Friday with a plan. I know it's challenging. I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear about it being messy, etc. He was great. He was right. He was very polite, but he was right to the point. Come back on Friday with a plan. So on Friday, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, came back and they came up with a plan. The big challenge is not to move the money back. The big challenge is there are so many entries. There's like 1.5 million entries, crazy number of entries. And before, in the past, these things were done by hand, if you can imagine. So they had to come up with an algorithm with a computer program. Okay, big deal, right? Someone's got to write a computer program and we'll figure out a way to get your money back. You got to understand, guys, that everything that we've paid, it's all in a box. It's in a digital box, if you will. We paid this IEEPA tariff, goes into a specific box. My company, VOS Selections, for this container, paid this much for an IEEPA tariff. On this date, boom, it's there. They can track it in a second. Challenges, there's so many. So they said we can do this in 45 days. And then I think there was a follow-up, and I believe that CBP said we're about 40% done. So the administration likes to make like it's really going to be an impossible thing, that it's going to take forever, that it's going to be legislated for 2 years. There's nothing to legislate. I mean, the courts are firmly ruled in our favor. So I expect refunds, whether you filed or not, there should be refunds. The important thing is that if there's a certain period, which is called the liquidation period, after you bring in a container, at which point it's sort of like case closed, and it's more or less a year after the container arrives. You don't want to let it get to liquidation. You need to file a complaint or a refusal or some such thing. Your freight forwarder or your customs broker will know how to do that. But there's a whole system set up. If you really want to know more information about this, there is something you should look at. The wonderful nonprofit that represented us is called the Liberty Justice Center. And they set up within their website, there's a separate section there called TARA for the tariffs. It's an acronym. I forgot what it stands for. But if you go to the Liberty Justice Center website, you'll be able to find it. And there's a lot of FAQs there that can help guide you through what's going on with tariffs and refunds.
So you didn't pay any legal fees to pursue all this?
I did not pay any legal fees.
Great.
They're a nonprofit. They're wonderful people. It's a libertarian, nonpartisan group. And like I said, one of the co-counsels, Professor Ilya Soman, he's from the Antonin Scalia School of Law. So you wouldn't call him a left-wing loony, would you? That's what I'm saying. This is completely across the board. It's completely. Yeah. You know who I got a letter from last week? No kidding.
I was just going to ask you this question.
Oh, you were? I got a letter from Mike
BP.
Pence.
Yeah.
From Mike Pence.
Yeah.
Beautiful letter.
Yeah.
Thanking me.
For your courage.
Thanking me for supporting and standing up for the Constitution. I mean, I was kind of bowled over.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to ask you the exact question to get that letter to say you have courage.
And he wrote an amicus brief. And if you saw after we won, McConnell came out and made a statement. He said, hey, guys, I told you, this was completely wrong, these tariffs. It was done wrong. Everything about it was wrong. And justice was served today. It was exactly the right decision. I mean, it was a clear case, There was no subtlety to this. They were just trying to sidestep the rule of law. It really was, and in such a hurtful way. There are a lot of business people from all sides of the aisle that are very, very angry. I can tell you that. I can tell by the letters that I got. Wow. And of course, we got the nasty ones too, I promise you.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
I don't know if you know it, but you right now, you are speaking to the son of Satan.
You too, huh?
I am the son of Satan, and a greedy one. I guess. I mean, I always thought Satan was greedy, but yes, maybe his sons were very greedy. I'm very greedy. That's all I'm thinking about is my bottom line. Anyway, yes, we've had some very colorful letters.
Oh, it was an amazing story, Victor, and thank you.
Totally. It has been an amazing journey.
Wow.
Now I'm sure you're glad you put your name to it, right? To see.
Oh yeah.
Your name versus the U.S. is something.
Well, I got to tell you, Mark, when I first saw my name, the case is still in the record books, VOS Selections versus Trump et al. And I saw that in writing, and first I laughed, and then I got scared.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very strong mix of emotions, I can tell you that.
Wow.
A very strange place to be. But we live in strange times, so it's fitting.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Victor. Thank you very much
My
for
pleasure. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kim.
everything.
Thank you
It's
for your
been
story and thank you for your insight and what a roller coaster this has been
it's
for
been a
you. And
roller coaster, yeah.
I'm very grateful that you came onto our show and shared
Oh,
all
it's
of
been a
this with
pleasure.
us.
It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing the show and for covering the story. It's an important one.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find us on our website, thewww.wine. Today's special guest has been Victor Owen Schwartz of VOS Selections. You can find him on his website, vosselections.com. Cheers.
Cheers.
Wine, wine.